Hello and welcome to the Memory Caps podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon trading card game community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week we'll be speaking with our guests about their background with Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and give them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Kevin Clemente, better known in the Pokemon community as Mellow_Magikarp. Kevin is an incredibly talented player, achieving a Worlds Invite in 2019 in just his first season playing competitively. He's had multiple strong finishes at major events, including 2 regional top 16s. He's also the host of the Lake of Rage podcast, where he's interviewed regional, international, and world champions, as well as content creators and other important individuals in the Pokemon TCG community. His YouTube channel is also a very helpful resource, providing players with deck lists, meta predictions, and lessons on how to improve as a player. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. We're both teachers. I don't know what your schedule is like, but I have about a week left of summer, so I'm trying to soak it all in as much as I can.
I've got 3 weeks, although actually that's not even true. I've got next week and then the week after I have, but my kids' daycare they're going on vacation. So I'm gonna be a stay-at-home dad. So it's like still summer, but also a lot of work during
Yeah,
that
you
time.
get to be at home during the day, but there's more responsibilities.
Exactly.
Yes. Um, is there anything I may have kind of missed with my introduction? Anything you want our listeners to know about you that I might not have brought up?
I mean, there was also the 2022 Worlds invite in addition to the 2019, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
before last season, I was 2 for 2 on invites. Now I'm 2 for 3 because I took the year off to have a kid, right?
Oh, the struggle, right?
It's yeah, for anyone listening to this, I cannot stress enough. That season where you have a child, just assume you're not going to do any of your hobby. Like whether that's Pokemon or whether Pokemon's like a side hobby to something else, that first year is very fun, but time consuming as heck.
Yes. Um, I'm saying yes as if I can relate, but I can imagine. Um, so I'm just going to kind of get started with the question we ask all of our guests, which is, what is your favorite card of all time and why?
This is such a hard question. And even though you sent it to me in advance, I am still kind of like, I don't entirely know. I've got multiple. So my favorite decks of all time have been Zoroark Garbodor and Buzzwole Things. I tend to lean towards the Buzzwole with Sledgehammer when I talk about my favorite card of all time, but Garbotox Garbodor is also another one that is so close. So one of my favorite things about Buzzwole was the Buzzgarb Shrine deck. And then Garbotoxin, one of my favorite things is that it also has Trash Avalanche. And I'm just such a big fan of these cards because they promote your opponent to kind of doom themselves. You know, you play into the sledgehammer turn. Garbotoxin gives you that comeback ability if your opponent didn't build a board. They didn't thin their deck enough. Trashalanche worked with Garbotoxin. Of course, I didn't play before Trashalanche existed. Trashlands and Garbotoxin were always there. It was like, okay, your opponent can play around it by not playing items, but then they're essentially item locked, or they play items and you're winning the game. So I really like those types of cards like a lot. The ones that like your opponent has a say in what happens, but no matter what they do, they're going to do something wrong that you can capitalize on. So it's either Buzzwole or Garbodor. Buzzwole Sledgehammer, not the GX.
Gotcha. Okay. Those are both really good. Those are so I guess technically played before you played, but then took a break. So during all of that I was not playing. So um
Oh, those are good formats.
yes, I need to definitely play a little bit more of that. Now I am curious because your name is Mellow_Magikarp. You're known for being named after having your username related to a Pokemon. You have the Lake of Rage podcast.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular favorite Magikarp or Gyarados card?
So no, not technically, but I do have like one that I own that is definitely my favorite. And this just goes back to like the power of friendship, right? Before the pandemic, base set Gyarados was pretty cheap, right? And for those of you who know me following along, I'm sponsored by a local game store, Tabletop Village. The owner got a pretty mint condition base set Gyarados, first edition. And he was like, hey, I'll sell this to you for, TCG low minus 10%. And if you pay me the PSA, I'll just give you what it is. Like he knew that it was going to be worth more. And then the pandemic happened and the card boom happened and
Mm.
we get it back. And it came back as a 9, which is a several $1,000 card. But he's like, okay, you owe me, it was like $100 for PSA plus what it cost pre-pandemic. like pre-boom. And I was like,
Wow.
bro, you're really like, you're not gonna overcharge me. He's like, I promised, you know? And so that one, it has a special place because of the extra story behind it. Like it's the most valuable card I own, but also it's just like, wow, like this is incredibly nice that he was willing to do that. And it's like super cool. It has that like extra special meaning to it. So I would say the one that I own would be my favorite.
That is really cool. That's awesome, dude. Is
Yeah.
there and I guess this then kind of transitions into our next question of like how did you get involved with Pokemon? I guess the TCG, but also like Pokemon in general. I know like you said, like you are a relatively new player to the game.
Yeah.
So how did you maybe first get involved with Pokemon? Did you play it as a kid? I mean, is Gyarados and Magikarp are Pokemon you like? I kind of have a feeling. When did kind of the TCG then become a big part of your enjoyment of Pokemon?
For sure. So my story is going to relate to a lot of the audience. And I'm going to say right now, I'm 32. And if you're like plus or minus that age range, what I'm going to say is probably the exact same thing that you out there are going to have. And feel free to DM me on Twitter if you want to share stories of that same age range and how we grew up with Pokemon. But as a child, Red and Blue came out. And as a kid, I was always in like the remedial reading classes. Like it was always like something like, I just can't read, blah, blah, blah. And then my parents got me Pokemon Blue version and I played it. And it turns out when a child wants to read something, they can suddenly read pretty darn well. And that was actually the thing that took me out of like remedial classes into advanced classes was playing Pokemon and having this massive vocabulary. I was the person who talks to every single NPC. I'm looking at the, you know, the names of the attacks and I'm actually like thinking about what the names are or like on the cards, weakness, resistance, stuff like that. Like those are big words to a first grader, probably second grader, maybe, you know, like a really young kid. And so that's just a special place that Pokemon has in my heart in general of like why I've stuck with it, other than the usual, like I was a kid in, you know, the late 90s. So everyone played Pokemon, but like it has that extra special place in my heart because I credit a lot of my like academic success and learning and like my like of school and things like that to Pokemon and how much I got out of the game.
Wow, that is very cool, dude. Did you? I mean, I feel like most kids back then, had cards but didn't necessarily know how to play them. What's kind of the story for you with collecting the cards, seeing the cards, enjoying them as a kid, to then 15 to 20 years later almost beginning to actually play them competitively? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, so I own cards, like I said, everyone who's in their like 30s, late 20s is that exact thing you said, right? Owned cards, didn't know what to play. I was the one person who did know how to play because of the Game Boy Color game. And again, that's one I've noticed a lot of competitive players say that exact same thing of like, I grew up with the cards. None of my friends knew how to play or cared to learn how to play. And I learned through the Game Boy Color game. So I did know how to play. I played the Game Boy Color game a lot. I've gone back to it a whole bunch. It is so much fun. It's going to come out on the eShop pretty soon, quote unquote. I don't know. We don't know when it's going to come out, but potentially very soon. They've already teased it. It is an incredibly fun game. Highly recommend to everyone.
Did you know there's
So
a sequel that only came out in Japan?
I did. I played the fan translated version.
Nice.
Yeah. Which, if anyone out there is listening, feel free to DM me and I can let you know how to find it because it is also a very fun game. So yeah, I did know how to play, right? But no one else knew how to play, so the cards never like went anywhere with it. And then I'm also a huge baseball fan. Not was I am a huge baseball fan, and there was a card game called MLB Showdown, which was complete RNG fest. It's literally you roll a d20 and see what happens. It has very minimal skill, but very fun and very good because as a child, I was able to compete with full grown adults because you're rolling d20s and then seeing what happens pretty much. Um, I got into that instead because there was a local league. I really liked baseball. And so that kind of took me out of, I still played the Pokemon games, but I went away from the card game. And then, middle school happens and you're too cool for everything. And then high school happens. You're kind of still too cool for everything, but not really. And then it wasn't until college where I kind of got picked up back into Pokemon. And then, life happens, blah, blah, blah. One summer, I'm a teacher, like you mentioned. I have my first summer where I am financially stable enough not to work over summer. It's a few years into the career. And I'm like, okay, what the heck do I do with my life right now? And I discovered YouTube has cool content. And I found Jaywitz. Jaywitz had some Pokemon TCG videos that were at that point years old. Like they were way outdated even when I started watching them. But I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. There's a game here, right? And then I found, branch off that, the recommended things, Tablemon. Tablemon is a great content creator and at the time was easily the best. Like Pokemon TCG content was pretty bare bones back in the day. So I'm watching some Tablemon stuff occasionally and I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. And then there was some time in 2017, 2018 when GameStop was like, we're getting rid of all of our TCG stuff and everything was super marked on clearance. So I was able to pick up a couple, like the Tapu Koko collection and stuff like that for like literal dollars. It was, a couple bucks to pick up some packs. And then I'm opening packs. I'm like, okay, this is cool. I'm like, okay, I've watched some YouTube videos of playing the game. I remember how to play as a kid, kind of. And now I own a bunch of cards that I don't want to look at. No disrespect to collectors. I have zero interest in looking at cards. Like they're there to play to me. And so eventually I kind of got into, going to league and stuff like that. Part of the like buying some clearance stuff was some Tapu Bulu tins. And I pulled some Vikavolt. So I played some Vikabulu, which is definitely one of the decks that has ever existed. And yeah, I kind of got into it that way of going to league and being like, okay, this is pretty fun. And then my league had people who were, not competitive, but like they were other adults you could play with and talk to and stuff like that. And then it kind of less and less and less. And it was like, okay, I have to go to official tournaments to actually like meet and play people who I'm going to have fun with. And then I went to a couple league cups in that first season, which was like right before 2018 Worlds. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at this game. Like I didn't like realize it until then, but like watching Tablemon videos, playing a little bit on PTCGO, I was like, okay, I'm good at this game. And then I was like, okay, next season I'm gonna go hard in it. And that's how I got back into the trading card game.
There we go. All right. And then, like we mentioned in the beginning, that first season ended up going pretty well for you,
Yeah.
right? So now we're talking about like going into, so you're like, like 17, 18, you pick up the game again. So then 18, 19, you're like, I'm gonna play a full season and see how it goes.
Hmm. Yeah.
Did you have
I
a? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I think this might actually lead into the question, but going into that season, I talked with my wife and I was like, I want to do this. Like, I want to be able to travel. I want to do this. I think I can do this. And she is the most supportive person in the world. And she was like, yeah. And I'm like, I want to hire a coach. Like, I want to hire someone to like fast track this into getting good. And so I did that. And I did coaching sessions all through that like summer and stuff like that to kind of fast track getting into being a good player.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess yeah, and that does like relate to the question I was going to ask, which is like, did you obviously you had like improvement on the mind? Did you have getting a Worlds invite in your first season as kind of a goal, or did the season just start going pretty well and you kind of went from there? I know you just actually released an episode of Lake of Rage with multiple players talking about getting their first Worlds invite, and there's kind of varying levels of like, I've played for a few years, then I finally got like one big breakthrough season versus this is my first season, I'm going to get my Worlds invite. What was kind of your mentality going into that season? Were you looking just to improve, and then the Worlds invite kind of just came along with that, or was that your goal right at the beginning?
Yeah, it was my goal. And I know there was some Twitter discourse about this recently where it seemed like every big name wanted to state their opinion on it. And it was like, you don't have to play for Worlds, stuff like that. But I am a very like logical, concrete person. I'm a science teacher, no shock there, right? That was the only like goal. It was making day two at a regional and earning a Worlds invite. Cause there's like, oh, you can keep improving, you can keep having fun. And I'm like, I can't measure those things. Like I can know that I'm having fun, but like there's no metric of funness. And so for me, it was like, yes, I need a tangible goal. And my goal was to make Worlds, also to make day two. And I ended up losing a couple win-ins that year. So I didn't get that one the first year, but I did get the Worlds invite that year.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like just the kind of the abstract idea of like improving as a player. Well, especially if we're in a season that awards CP, we're kind of out of like the pandemic season and stuff. Well, if you're improving, you're probably getting CP, and if you're improving more, you're going to get more CP and more day twos, and then the World's invite is kind of on the horizon. So, unless you're like a brand new player, then improving does kind of eventually lead to achieving a goal with all that improvement, right?
Yeah. It's like it's very laud like there are steps in between getting a world's invite, but you have to improve to get there. You can't just play at the same level. So yeah, for me it was like I know what the steps in between it are.
Mm-hmm. So could you then tell us a little bit about that season? You said you had like some win-ins, you had some big finishes, and obviously you ended up with that Worlds invite in 2019. What kind of decks were you playing? What was your kind of plan for how to play out that season?
Yeah. So that season was a very typical, like the things you're seeing people tweet out about how to get Worlds Invite now. I was that player. It was several top 128s or top 64s at regionals. And the decks I was playing was I would pick a deck and kind of stick to it. So West Coast had a lot of expanded. Pre-pandemic, West Coast regionals were at least 50% expanded. So that's where I started, right? And like I said, I'd gotten coaching at the beginning, and this was when Expanded just had massive bans. I got coaching from Isaiah Williams, who was a regional champion with Zoro Eggs, which was the Hex Maniac, et cetera, deck. He had built Zora Garbodor with bursting balloons and Klefki as kind of the same thing of like, I can shut off my opponent, I can shut off their roadblock Sudowoodo. And that was my first deck that I played in my first two regionals, which was Portland and Anaheim. And I definitely outsmarted myself a little bit in the way I was playing and just like I threw so hard. Like looking back at how bad I was, it's amazing that I was able to get a top 128 and top 64 with just like such bad play. But that just shows how good Zorak Garbodor was. And so, yeah, I just played a whole bunch of Zorak Garbodor. All my locals were expanded pretty much. And so I was just like, all right, I'm just going to play a whole bunch of this, go prop trade, propagation execute, trade it away, propagation execute, trade it away, and just draw 6 to 8 free cards every single turn. And it was such a good, powerful deck. So it was like that plus locals, those first couple of regionals, I was like, this is sick. And then Team Up came out. And when Team Up came out, that was it. That was love. That was Pikarom. I love Pikarom so much. That deck was so fun. I got a top 128 Denver regionals with it. And it was the same thing. It was like they were fine finishes, was losing, winning in Anaheim to my opponent played Roadblock Sudowoodo, and I didn't in a Zorogarb mirror because I was like, no one knows this deck exists, which is untrue. But oopsies, right? New player, I didn't fully understand what metas were in teching. And so, yeah, Pikarom, I just kind of stuck with that for a while. Did well at Denver. I won a handful of league cups, was between Zorogarb and Pikarom in that whole season. And yeah, it was just a lot of locals. And then, like I said, two 128s and a 64 in that season.
Hmm. So then you eventually were able to, attend your first Worlds. I do
Yeah.
like vaguely, as someone who's like listened to to a good amount of your content, I do like vaguely remember you talking about like peak ROM with judges. Was that kind of the group that you played with, or am I like
No,
mixing that up with something else?
I played that afterwards. So in the
Gotcha.
2019 to pandemic 2022 season, I won 3 league cups in 3 weeks with Pikarom Judge. It was yeah. I farmed my locals. Washington players that are listening to this, look, you're good now, but they were not quite as skilled before. And so that was another reason it was like, oh, it's hard to get points at locals. It really depends on your region. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you can really walk in there and you're like, oh, the other 3 good players aren't here. I'm fine. And sometimes you walk into a cup and you're like, oh, this is going to be really hard. It's regions are very, very, very different. But anyway,
Yes, I'm driving up for a cup tomorrow that apparently capped at like 40 something players. So I'm like, okay, cool. Haven't played in a real event in 3 weeks since NAIC. We'll see how it goes.
you'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm just playing
Just
Guardy, just doing my
set up.
thing.
Oh yeah, you're good.
Oh
Guardy's
yeah.
so broken. So that Worlds actually was a tough one. I got married in late July. Worlds was in August, and then our honeymoon we were in China and Japan for weeks.
Mm.
And so I stopped testing in shortly after NAIC, which I didn't go to. This past season was my first NAIC. I've always had my invite before that, and I was like, I'm not flying to Columbus. I hate that idea. So I didn't play NAIC, so I was kind of focused on Worlds a little bit in advance. We had seen the set that was going to come out in advance, and then that was the one with the rotation. That part was a surprise. Or I don't know if I remember if it was a surprise at the time. Whatever. I'd been testing it a bit because I skipped out on NAIC, but then come mid-July, I was like, okay, I'm done. No more Pokemon. Like I have to make sure everything's good for the wedding and all this other stuff and make sure everything's good for the honeymoon. I have to get my visa in order to actually be able to travel. And so I was like, all right, I'm peak around. That's it. Done. Like I've played it. I tested a lot of stuff. And it's just unfortunate because that Worlds, it was the rotation one. We were cooking. We were cooking some good stuff. And my friend who it's I love testing partners who are just like, yeah, let's just play Pokemon. He didn't have a Worlds invite. He had nothing to gain from helping me so much, but I was just like, yeah, let's just play Poke. So shout out to Steven if you're listening to this. Anyway, yeah, we were cooking some good stuff, right? We were not far off of the abilities art list that Limitless brought. We never had the Victini tech. We had Pidgeotto control. Like we had the deck, but we weren't Jimmy Pendarvis, RIP, is just the best deck builder ever, or one of the best deck builders ever. Like he really cracked it. We didn't crack it quite as much, but the fact that we were cooking it was like, oh, so good. Anyway, yeah, we were like, okay, no, we're done. Pikarom, like it's here, it's built, we're good to go. And then yeah, we go marriage, honeymoon, etc. Come back from Japan to Seattle, sleep in our bed for a night, and then we both go to my wife and I to DC the next night, and it's Whirl for the next day. I haven't played Pokemon for
Oh
like
God.
well over a month. I hadn't even been. The amount of travel was like ridiculous. It was, massive time difference. It's like, I'm sure it's going to go fine. And it went pretty fine. That was another one where I lost it winning into day two in a very unfortunate manner. So Worlds was like all Malamar. And in fact, my locals, they had messaged, we had internet. Hooray. We've been messaging. They're like, no, we're on Malamar with Morty. Morty was if one of your psychic Pokemon's knocked out, I forget if it was random or you look at your opponent's hand and you shuffle a card back in.
I gotta look it up because I do not know what Morty does.
No one should know what it does. It was bad. Everyone did bad who played that deck.
Psychic type is knocked out, your opponent reveals their hand, choose two cards you find there, and then shuffle them back into their deck. It does not have any finishes
okay.
on Limitless.
No. So they played Malamar with that, and the idea was like reset stamp Morty, and then you lock them out of the game at that point with some tag team in the active. Yeah, it sounds broken, but Malamar sucked. Like it was so bad for that Worlds. And I farmed a whole bunch of Malamars until the winning, and that was the part that hurt. My opponent started their one of path, and I know it was or power plant. I know it was a one of because they told me after 2 games in a row, and I had nothing. I had to Volkner for Stadium Nav, another card no one should know what it does. Stadium Nav is a terrible card.
Oh, I love Stadium Nav.
No, I hate it after this. Volkner for Stadium Nav, double tails, 2 games in a row. And then I can't Dedenne, and I was like, okay, I just lose. Like Malamar is gonna donk me. And anyone who played in that Worlds format, Malamar donking you that should never happen.
Yeah,
like,
that deck was
so slow.
That deck is very slow.
So that was one of the points where I really was able to like internalize, hey, there's randomness in this game, and sometimes you just lose. And it was the worst way to lose. Like it felt so bad. I had been just stomping people all day. That's not even true. I did take a tie and a loss at one other point, right? But like we were doing pretty okay. I beat Philip Scholes, which is still one of those things that like, one of the first big international names I'd ever played against. And he was on the Zard, and I was like, oh no, this is terrifying. Like he was 4-0 and I was 3-0-1 or something like that. And I was like, this is terrifying. Like he clearly knows what he's doing. This is a massive name, and I got him, and I'm like, this is my tournament. I cannot lose. And then power plant pass. Like, okay, well, Pokemon.
Yeah, sometimes it's bound to happen to all of us at some point, right?
Yeah, that's something you have to like figure out in this game. Is like sometimes you will just lose games, and that's okay.
Yes. So then after that we have the COVID season, and you said like I'm apologize for not even like realizing this. You said you actually had an invite for this last Worlds from last year.
Yeah.
Did you?
I had it pre-pandemic.
Yes, because I'm assuming you said you won 3 cups with Pikarom, so I'm assuming you farmed locals pretty hard. Leading.
I also had a top 16 and 32 and 2 regionals so it was that helped too, right?
Yeah,
that
pretty
was
strong
140 points.
Yes. So I know that like right after the pandemic, kind of season picked up, and we had the Salt Lake City regional. You got top 16 with Arceus and Teleon. Did you play much more in that season after that, or because I don't want to assume just based off like Limitless stuff, like had you been playing? Did you take a bit of a break? Because I know you also had your kid pretty recently. Where were you at kind of with the rest of like the 2022 season and going into Worlds that year?
Yeah, so post-pandemic, I didn't play a whole lot because I had my invite. Like the fact that the first post-pandemic regional in the US was so close, I was like, I have to go to this, like for sure. And then I went to Vancouver as well, and I played Gyarados VMAX, which I didn't test it enough. I was just like, I want to play my favorite Pokemon. And then I played a bad list. And shout out to Boosie K, Grant Matthey, who we were going to same 60. And then I was like, you don't need Pumpkaboo. Pumpkaboo sucks. And then I cut it and then I got pathed out of multiple rounds. He got top 64 with what would have been the same list had I not been a moron. But yeah, I did play one other regional that season. I skipped NAIC that season because, again, I was like, I've got my invite. I don't need to go to Ohio. I'm just going to hang out.
Hmm.
And so I didn't play a whole lot that season. I haven't played a whole lot actually since that, unfortunately, because I had a kid shortly after Worlds that year. So yeah, I was like Salt Lake City and then Vancouver, and then that was it for that season. Like I know a bunch of people grind hard that season, but I was not one of them.
Gotcha. So then I guess like transitioning a little bit away from just like your competitive player side, and I'm sure we'll touch back onto it. I do want to talk a little bit about um, like the Mellow underscore Magikarp channel,
Mhm.
the Lake of Rage podcast. At what point did you then begin to go from just like being a competitive player to being also someone who wanted to make content? What was your kind of inspiration for that and your goals with the Lake of Rage podcast and the channel and all that stuff that you've been making for the last couple of years?
Yeah. So I knew I was a pretty good player, right? And then the pandemic happened and our school pretty much shut. I mean, it literally shut down, but like the online infrastructure was not there. And so it essentially shut down virtually as well in March. And I didn't know what to do with myself. It was just like, it was one of the downsides of being educated is it was very obvious not going to be a short-term thing after like that first week or two. I was like, oh, this is, I didn't know it was going to be as long as it was, but it was like very obviously like, I think the school year might be kind of dead. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, what do I do with my life? Like, I can't do nothing. The gym is closed. It's probably going to stay closed for a little while. It's my other hobby is, working out. Right. And so I was like, I don't know what to do. It's like, okay, I'm a good player. I know how to communicate. I'm going to start streaming. So I started streaming on Twitch a bit. At first, it was like, locals and stuff like that. And eventually it just got bigger and bigger. And I have to thank Azul GG a lot for some of that because I'd been a member of Azul's chat for a while, although I don't think like we didn't know each other like at all. But like he recognized the name from chat. And so he would raid me a couple times and that helped the growth of the channel so much. A
Mm.
lot of any content creators out there who are like, oh, I don't know how to grow, having a good social media presence is one, but also just kind of being lucky is another one. And getting a raid from someone like Azul or Tricky Jim is just absolutely massive to like suddenly, you're averaging like 20 something people per stream. And then it can keep growing and growing because people click on the person who has the most on Twitch. And at that point, and kind of like now, actually, there's not that many streamers, mostly now because live sucks. Then, because it was a pandemic, and then people are like, why am I playing Pokemon? And I'm like, this is the only thing I want to do right now is play a bunch of Pokemon.
Especially in
And so,
that
like,
format too, right?
oh gosh, no, that format was bad. That was the ADPZ format, right?
Mm-hmm. And then Hammers, Eternatus,
Yeah,
Pikarom.
those are ooh, those some bad formats. I enjoyed though. Oh my! Anyone who played back in the limitless, not the like play limitless things, but those limitless qualifiers, those massive 1,000+ person tournaments. I streamed those, and that was another reason that my channel grew so fast. Right? Is I was one of the best players who was streaming the only competitive thing that we had, and it always sounds like I'm. So this is also something else. I will always talk about like I'm a good player because I don't want to be seen as a podcaster. So if it's like, why does this dude keep saying that? I always feel like I got to remind people because it's like, bro, I'm not just a podcaster. Like I got some good stuff behind me. But there's like no one streaming at the time. And so it was like, okay, this dude's streaming the thing. He's doing well. If you look at my Limitless page, I did well in those tournaments. Shout out to half my Limitless page being online events, which is whether that's good or bad is a whole different conversation. But yeah, it helped a ton. And it was like my ability to talk through plays and things like that. It helped me, it helped viewers a whole lot. And that's something that there was recently that conversation on what's it called? Twitter about coaching and stuff like that. And the ability to communicate is so important. And if you're a viewer watching, there's entertainment value and then there's learning. No offense to the Pokemon trading card game, the entertainment value is pretty mid most of the time. Like even if live is the most beautiful card game client ever, there's only so much entertainment that you can have. And
Hmm.
so the educational value does come into play. And that's why Azul is so big, right? He talks through his plays. He explains why things are incorrect. And so that's kind of where I started to go with my plays is like, okay, let's talk through every single situation. Let's talk through why this is correct, why this is incorrect. And, chat would occasionally help me and be like, oh, you missed this, which is super helpful for me. It was super helpful for them because they're like, why are you entertaining these ideas? It's like, well, because what if these ideas are correct? Like, what if the idea feels wrong now, but it's actually the best play in the long term? Like, you have to think about every single play that's available to you.
Hmm.
That was how the channel started. Way before YouTube, I was purely on Twitch for most of my content time during that time.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't even know that because I just like, as soon as COVID happened, I just like kind of dropped Pokemon for about a year. Played a whole lot of old school RuneScape, but was until kind of Chilling Reign came out, I was pretty like unaware of just like the developments in the Pokemon TCG. So any like, I just remember like coming back to the game, and I'm like, oh, there's this like Mellow underscore Magikarp guy. Like his content seems pretty good. I didn't even like realize all this had happened during that time.
Yeah, we had been popping off at one point on Twitch. I'm definitely a much better streamer than YouTuber, especially I was just watching Celio's network his review of whatever the next set is. Not Darkness Ablaze. Obsidian
Uh,
Flames.
yeah, it's all like dark and then fire. We've had like four variations of that now.
Yeah, the Charizard, the Dark Charizard thing.
Yeah.
That guy. I was watching his YouTube video and I was like, I am so bad at YouTube. Like, this is gorgeous. Like, why? I have a PowerPoint with like a picture of the card and then just explain why it's good. And he has like the cards like moving and the text has like this nice little outline on. And I was like, oh, I'm so bad at YouTube. But anyway, yeah, I'd been doing Twitch for a while. Twitch is so much more fun than YouTube, but I can't do it so much anymore as a dad because you spend 2 hours for a decent Twitch stream versus making a 10 to 15 minute video for me takes me 10 to 15 minutes usually. Like, there's no editing I put into it. Thumbnails are all mediocre. And so time wise, it just makes more sense to do YouTube now. But yeah, Twitch was the big one. We had been popping off for a while. I got rejected from Partner twice, which I'm still salty about because I want that stupid little purple check mark. But we never got there. And yeah, now we've transitioned over to YouTube, which, like I said, is purely out of convenience. YouTube is great for growth, though. For any wannabe content creators out there, if you want to stream, start on YouTube first because it's so easy for people to find you without knowing that they're looking for you.
Yeah, I have noticed like, on Twitch, like you have the people you're sub to, but on YouTube, like I'll open YouTube and like one out of every four things is like some Pokemon streamer with like 100 views or someone streaming or something like that. So I do feel like YouTube has been pushing their like streaming algorithm more. So it's a market people can get into. I know OmniPoke typically streams on YouTube. I don't really know who else does it right now.
Yeah, the Pokemon community, we have our own like platforms. It feels like you have to be on Twitter. If you stream, you have to be on Twitch, and then videos are, YouTube. And I think that there's a chance to break out of that. But yeah, the audiences go to Twitch in terms of live streams currently for Pokemon. That can change. That can definitely change for anyone who wants to who wants to try to do it. The audience will come to you if you're good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we got into YouTube then because it was eventually like, okay, I want to grow the channel. The second rejection of a Twitch partner was like, I just have to get bigger. Like 80 to 90 people watching isn't enough. And which is crazy to think about. If you think about like 80 people watching me play Pikarom hammers for the Players Cups is like, ooh. And that's where Lake of Rage came from too. It's like, yes, it's Magikarp Gyarados, but also I'm one of the saltiest players you will ever see. I think it was Mr. Soda King made YouTube videos of just compilations of like streamers getting so tilted at things. And
Really?
they're so funny. And I am definitely a big feature in those for the amount of salt that I had at various times. Like, it was so good. There's even a Twitch clip that goes around of me saying inappropriate things that I will not repeat on a family friendly podcast that some of my students had decided to clip and download and have now been
Ah,
sharing for years.
of
This
course.
happened 2020, 2021, one of those two. And I still have students who I'm going to have next year who are like, do you know that this is a thing? And I'm like, yes, I know it's a thing.
Oh
I
my
don't need to be
goodness.
reminded of it.
That's great. The kids always find it.
They're so good at finding things. They all find my Twitter so often too. They all, yeah, because my Twitter's public. Like my Instagram and Facebook, those are not public because that's my life. But Twitter is public because that's the only way you're going to grow as a content creator.
Yeah.
They all find it so fast.
Um, so then with like something like Lake of Rage, like what gave you the idea of like I want to start like doing podcasts, interviews? Did you kind of have like an initial goal for what the type of content was going to be with the podcast, and or was it like was the goal originally to kind of become what it is now, kind of interviewing these like you know tournament champions, talking about the meta, set reviews, things like that? How did it start, and what was kind of the path to where it's become now?
Yeah. So the truth and the disappointing answer is I had no interest in doing this. Like it was just like not my idea at all. But because I have a skill behind a microphone, uh, a friend, part of Carpe D's Rats, which is like the team that my friends and I are all on, Nikhil, the gyroscope Eevee, was like, hey, let's start a podcast as a team. It was like, Mello, Kevin, you're going to be the one doing this because you're good at talking. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like that's fine. And then it started off as us, just like every other podcast of just like friends talking about Pokemon. And then eventually it was like, I don't even know who the first guests were, but like we shot for the stars and they kept saying yes, which was
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. Cause like looking back, we had like no listeners, and like Robin Scholes and Tord and Pedro were all just like, yeah, of course I'll come talk to you for hours. And I was like, okay, cool. And at that point, it was like, well, I guess this is the new format of just talking to the best players in the world because they keep saying yes. And then, I don't have to keep selling myself as like, yo, look at me. Like, I want a Hegster. Like, I'm good at this game. Listen to me. It's like, no, no, no. Here's Henry Brand here to talk to you about stuff. And it became good for me too, because I am very selfish with the questions I ask. It's usually stuff that I want to know. And it turns out other people want to know it too. But it's like, this is going to help me as a player, like help my mentality with metagaming, deck building, gameplay, that kind of stuff. And so the original plan was I didn't want to. Nikhil decided, no, we're going to do it. And it's like, okay, whatever. And then he reached out to all these people and they said yes. And I was like, well, I guess this is what we're doing now. And now it's become just such a thing that's like, well, this is too much fun not to do.
Yes, and in that case, I do kind of like understand why there might be that frustration of people seeing you like as the podcast guy, because you are often like juxtaposed with world champions, international champions, right? Like, and obviously like that doesn't take away from any of your accomplishments, and makes you, I'm sure, makes you want to prove yourself, right?
Constantly. Yeah, that was the worst thing about scrubbing out of NAIC. So I went 2-3 with Arctina. And even like literally, the night before we're chatting and just towards there, right? He's locked it on Guardy. This is a well-known fact. And it was like, bro, I can't do Guardy. Like I tested it and I'm not there. I'm gonna switch to Arctina. And he's like, yeah, actually, I think Arctina is a much better play for you because you don't get to test a whole lot. And I think it is the second best deck right now. And he did, he put out a tier list saying that for Worlds too. Like he truly believes this. So it's like, okay, the best player in the game is backing up my deck choice. This feels good. And then I hit the stupidest matchups in the world. And so it went bad. But there's that part of me that's like, I prepped. Everything was ready. I tested so much. And then I hit the worst variants that I
Mm,
could have imagined. Shout out to Ting Lu round one.
no
God
way.
awful matchup for
No
Arctina.
way.
It's so bad. And so I was like, okay, I'm prepped. But then like, I have to go tell people that I went 2-3. And it's like, this feels so bad, even though I know that's purely just me who cares. No one else cares. Like, yeah, you did bad. That happens in Pokemon. It's okay. But I'm like, oh, bro, it's like I did so much work and I did bad. And I have to go tell everyone that I did bad. It's like,
Mm.
yeah, that kind of eats on me a little bit to get behind the mental of it.
For sure, it can definitely be like incredibly frustrating, um, especially like after like because you had a kid, so it's less opportunities to go to events, right? So like
Yes.
then when it happens, it obviously stings a little more, you know.
Oh yeah. That's the other worst part, right? Because I went to two regionals plus an IC that year, and I technically did okay. I did top 128 Portland, and it was same 60 as Andy who got top 4, right? Like we were prepped, we were good to go. It was broken, or same 59. Sorry, I cut the Snorlax. The Snorlax sucked, but yeah, it was like okay, that was great. Coming off of it, I actually prepped. We're good now, and then it was like I prepped again, and like, well, I went to 3 tournaments this year, and 2 of them did not go well.
Hmm.
This sucks.
So then, we're heading into the new season. We have Worlds in like I guess I don't know when this is going to release. Probably in a couple weeks. But we have Worlds in a
World's
in a
already
week.
happened.
Yeah, as of I think this is releasing about a week after Worlds. So congratulations to whoever won. But
Oh no, no. Here's the prediction. Congrats
oh,
to
for sure.
Cal Connor for winning with Gardevoir EX.
Ooh, okay. I could see that. I could see that. He did have a very good finish at NAIC. So, um, maybe
I got to root. Cal's a homie. I got to root for
yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know where I was going. I was about to say this thing. I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, I did see that Cal did either first or second at a cup with Reggie's.
He
Which
went to like a Tuesday afternoon cup with like 12 people.
yes, yeah. Some you never know how big these tournaments are sometimes, right? Like it is funny when like Chicago gets like 6 round challenges that like you go 4-2 and get top 16, which is just me being salty from last week. But um, and then like I see people go like 2-1-1 at a cup and get top four. But you never know the size of these tournaments. But I did have a friend yesterday at locals try out the Reggies, and it I don't know how Cal won that cup. Reggie's looks whatever Reggie's is now does not look too great, at least in my experience.
Not to derail the Cal too much, but he is actually just a nutso player. Like I think in terms of gameplay ability, he is very high up there. Like someone that I've tested with and I have to play against more than I would like to earn championship points. And yeah, he's just no matter what he's playing, it is scary because he will play to his outs to win as much as possible. It's very similar, like, watch Azul stream, right? Just because it's one of those like ones that everyone sees. Like you watch Azul stream, and you're like, oh, he always loses and he pulls out wins. It's the exact same thing with Cal, where you're just like watching him Reggie all over the place, and it's like, this deck sucks. And then suddenly it's like, oh no, you got Exodia. Like you're good to go, and you're just gonna win
Yeah.
this game. Yeah, that is such a good skill. That's like that highest tier of player versus the next tier down where I'd put myself of like, I don't always play to those outs when things go bad.
Hmm. Yeah, and a lot of that just comes with like just some people just have time to play so much or just like theorizing stuff. I forget who I was talking to exactly. I think actually I think it was might have been Nico Alabas. He was actually talking about Philip Schultz, who you mentioned before. Like, because I think
Mhm.
Philip just like I think last season Philip just like came out of nowhere and just like won a regional.
It was
Um,
like the only regional he went to or something like
yeah, it
that.
was with like Arceus Cinchino, and Nico was like, the reason that Philip can do that is because even though he's not playing the game very often, he is always thinking about the game, and he's always like being offered information from other good players, and he is processing that information constantly. So then when he picks up the game, like he knows exactly what he has to do, and like
Yeah.
that's a skill in and of itself, just like being able to consistently think about the game. And I know like people are talking about, with next season, like, oh well, if you don't have the availability to do this or that, like, don't try for your invite. There's there's ways to get an invite done, even if you don't have like massive availability or you have a pretty busy job. Like, there are ways to manage your time and manage the way you play the game and approach the game that can make a world's invite still pretty realistic for a lot of players, in my opinion.
No, for sure. Like, I guess to transition into the YouTube part of the content, with off of that is the fundamentals of the game don't change. The ability to prize check, prize map, manage your resources, all this type of stuff, it stays there. So you have someone like Philip Scholes or Sam Chen's another one who like doesn't play that much and then keeps doing incredibly well. That stuff will always be there when you pick up a deck. And so if you get those fundamentals down, you really can do it. And that's part of where the YouTube channel went. I've got a master's in education. I feel like I should use it sometimes. And so it's like that, plus knowing the game, is put out a bunch of things called the Get Good Academy. There's a whole playlist on YouTube. All the examples are so outdated. It was like Pikarom and Baby Blacephalon and stuff like that. But the concepts are so good. And I keep saying I need to redo these videos and I keep not doing it because I look back and I'm like, this is fine. It's good enough. But yeah, having those fundamentals down, being able to manage your resources and count, I need this many energy to win the game. I need this many Pokemon to win the game. I've been grinding so much Fusion Mew for no good reason. Honestly, I don't think I have any events until the next set comes out, but the deck is fun. But like I counted, okay, you have 4 Genesect, 4 Mew, and then 2 babies, an Ice Cube and a Meloetta. You have 10 Pokemon. Your opponent's going to take 2 knockouts, right? You need 6 Pokemon on the field in order to do everything. You can only realistically discard 2 Pokemon if none are prized in order to still be able to draw to 6 for the end of the game in order to find the Iono plus Path combo or whatever you might need for the game. Because one of the reasons you beat Mew is just they don't have enough Pokemon to draw big hands and pull off big combos to finish the game. And so it's like, okay, I know I'm playing Mew. I know I prized a Mew V. My heavy ball's nowhere to be seen. I can't discard this other Mew because then I may not be able to Psychic Leap or fill my bench or etc. And so like these are skills that these types of players have, even without playing the deck. They know it because they can see these things in the future. And so having these skills just through constant playing, it doesn't have to be playing the same deck. It's playing any deck and then seeing these things of like, well, my game plan on the last turn of the game is pull off a 3-card combo. How do I pull off a 3-card combo with Mew? Draw to 6, draw to 6, draw to 6. Like you just keep going boom, 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 right? And so I can't discard my Pokemon because they're one of my most valuable resources to draw more cards. It's like, yes, I want to get rid of them, but no, I can't. Or, okay, Battle VIP Pass, you want to discard it. I'm going to Ultra Ball the Battle VIP Pass because it's useless. No, Battle VIP Pass is cram fodder, right? It's another one of those things that like you play the deck a couple times and you're like, oh, well, duh, like this makes sense to me now. But like these players who have those fundamentals, they know Cram-O-Matic 50% of the time is anything I want. If I draw into it, I want this Battle VIP Pass in my hand, not the boss's orders. So maybe I want to get rid of the boss's orders because I have another one in deck and I only need one to win this game. And then you get the Cram-O-Matic and you can thin your hand more by getting rid of the Battle VIP Pass. And 50% of the time, you get the card you want and you win the game anyway. So it's like, yeah, these fundamental skills of just like knowing your resources, things like that are so applicable across all decks. And that's why you don't need to grind 100 games with a deck. You just need to play Pokemon thoughtfully. And if you play Pokemon thoughtfully, you will get to that point of I can manage my resources. I can prize map. I know I'm going to go knockout. I figured out what my opponent deck's going to do. They're going to put a 2-prizer in the active. That means I don't have to boss. I need less boss to win this game because they always have to attack me with whatever 2-prize Pokemon. Or they're always going to attack me with the 1-prize Pokemon. So boss are really important for this matchup because I have to get that Guardy EX off the bench and KO it. Otherwise, I'm always going to lose the prize race. Just all these little things that are so applicable across all decks. And you can't just blindly play your cards and be like, I played 100 games. Why am I still losing? Well, because you're not thinking. You're just kind of playing cards and seeing what happens. You're not thinking, how do I win this game? Where am I going to get there? All these little things that go check out the Get Good Academy on YouTube, watch all of them. They're short, they're great. And it's like, oh, I'm not doing this every game, or, oh, I'm doing this, but I could be doing it better, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that, well, it's funny because my next question was going to be like, what, especially for you as somebody who like got into the game and a year and a half later had a Worlds invite, like, what are some suggestions you'd give to players? And I guess this then ties in a bunch of different things, like we are now coming into a new season. Worlds, expectations have been set for best finish limits, CP, things like that. What are your kind of suggestions outside of obviously listen to Lake of Rage, listen to those great interviews, watch all of Get Good Academy? Do you have any particular suggestions for players who are looking now to, trying to set a good big goal for themselves for this upcoming season with 600 championship points being needed to get a Worlds invite? And like we were talking about at the beginning, both of us I think are people where even though we both want to improve, both of us just want to be like, well, if I improve, I want to go to Worlds. Like, Worlds is the goal. It's not just abstractly improving. It's going to Worlds. And if I don't go to Worlds, how close I got is how much I improved, to last year. Like, what is some advice you'd have for players who are also looking to achieve that goal, who might be newer to the game?
Yeah, so there's multiple things. The first one is for lack of a better term, like make friends in the game, like find people that you can chat with, things like that. Ideally in person. And part of that is because PTCG Live just is so bad. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, live,
one
but
of
it's
the things I was also going to mention, like you were talking about, like playing intentionally. I feel like I have like the double, like this like curse of like first of all, like of having two monitors, so it's just very distracting, and then PTCGL being very like visually unappealing. Like it's hard to begin. Like in person, I feel like I feel like I can test and play very intently. I open up PTCGL and it's like I'll be playing a game and like the last thing my eyes want to do is like stare at that screen. I wanted to just like do something else. But yeah, so I think that like doing testing in person I think is very underrated.
Yes. And when you're testing in person, especially like you said, it is the best thing. Find someone at your locals. I think one of the most overrated things too is like, oh, you should always find someone better than you. I mean, yes, that would be great, but that's not the least bit necessary. Skill level of a testing partner isn't necessary if you're both willing to test optimally. And the way to test is when you're in person, both of you are there, you're both open hand. You're both talking through your plays as you do them and you're agreeing to plays. Even if you're not great players, it doesn't matter because two or more sets of eyes are going to combine to be a great player. Like two mediocre players looking at the same board state will be able to find plays and see the right thing and be able to argue, no, this plays better here because of this. And especially if one person knows one deck better than the other, they can always be like, oh, I'm playing Lugia. I play so much Lugia. And they're like, hey, can I test against your Lugia? You're playing open hand. And you're like, oh, I'm going to do this to your Lugia deck. And the Lugia player is like, that's an okay play in theory. But if you do that, these are the next steps that I'm going to do. So it's being able to talk through all of these things is so important. You're open hand. You're saying, my goal this, you draw your card. There's another Get Good Academy. I had a whole video on it. And it's the most simple thing in the world. You draw your card for turn. You say, my goal this turn is to do blank. My goal this turn is to Iono you and to knock out your active Pokemon with Psychic Leap, right? Okay, how am I going to get to my goal? Well, I don't have Iono. In order to KO a Psychic Leap, I need a Power Tablet. And then you're like, okay, now I go through the rest of the motions, right? But every turn, this is practice or not. You draw your card for turn. My goal is blank. And then you make the plays to achieve that goal. Some decks is easier than others. Arctina, my goal is to play Path of the Peak and judge you. That's fine. You need to know that that's your goal. So when you're testing in person, you're both open hand, you're both talking through your plays. If you have more than two people, that's fine too. Testing for not this Worlds, but the last one that I played at, we ended up making Inteleon Zard, which was so much fun to build that deck because it was a new deck at the time, right? But it was myself, his friend Owen, and friend Kobe. We were all sitting there, three of us on one game. It would take us an hour to finish a game talking through all the plays because Inteleon Zard on its own is an incredibly complicated deck. And we were, like I said, making it up as we go. So it was even harder. And so we would sit there and just be like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do here? Okay, if I do this, do I have enough scoop up nets in deck in order to do this? Right. And so it took forever to get through these games. So one of those hour-long games was so much better than 10 to 20 games on PTCGO against randos on my computer, right? So if you're playing in person, it's open hand, as many eyes as possible. It is talking through every play and why it matters. That is the first and foremost thing. You see people all the time, like, I'm testing at locals. Like, no, you're not. You're just playing games against each other. That's kind of testing, but that's not testing. You're playing
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon. There is a massive difference between those two things.
Yeah, I think that's a very I think that's like the biggest thing, like the difference between I'm gonna play versus this deck versus I'm gonna test versus this deck. Because I feel like testing does require at least some level of like selflessness and humility that like you don't necessarily need for just like playing a game. Like you were saying, like, well, I want to play against Lugia. Well, now the Lugia player could be selfish and be like, well, I don't want to like play open hand. What if I lose? Well, you're not playing to win or to lose. You're playing to learn, right? Like I do
Yes.
think like when I first kind of started doing that with some friends that I was testing with, like there was a little voice in the back of my head. It's like, well, I don't want to lose this game that I'm testing. It's like, well, it doesn't matter if I lose. Like we're both gonna like the sheer amount of knowledge we're gonna get in this game like will help me not lose other games that actually matter, right? Outside of this
Yes.
testing game.
And sometimes too, if you're getting beaten by your testing partner, like I'm on Lugia, you're on Guardy, right? We're playing. Suddenly it's like, oh, I'm helping you beat Lugia. And now suddenly it feels like an unfavored matchup for Lugia when I used to beat Guardy all the time. That's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean you're a bad Lugia player. Doesn't mean that means you're a good Guardy player. And you can now switch to Guardy because you helped the Guardy player figure out the matchup so you understand the matchup. And you're like, oh, this is actually a good matchup for Guardy. And so now I'm going to switch to Guardy. That is totally fine. And that's something that happens all the time too. Of if you're like, oh, I don't want to test this matchup because I think I'm going to lose. Well, then maybe that is the deck you should be playing instead of the deck you're currently playing, right?
Yeah. And I think
So
that also like then leads into kind of like another question about just like deck selection. I know one of the things that I've I've seen you do on your YouTube channel when talking about events that I feel like I've started seeing other content creators and podcasts like pick up on this, but feel like you were the first person I saw to consistently be like, well, if I'm
Mhm.
going to this tournament based on my predictions of the meta, I'm going to play X of this deck. I'm going to play X of this deck. I'm going to play 0 to 1 of this archetype, so I'm more comfortable losing to this one. Like how much thought are you putting into things like that when it comes to your deck selection, and how can players become a bit more conscious of things like that when selecting what they're going to play?
Yeah. Firstly, I think I was the first, but I want to say anyone out there, please steal what I do for content and do it as your own because I make content that I want to watch and I don't want to watch myself because I already know my opinion. So the fact that other people have started doing it is so nice for me because I get to see other people's opinions of the content that I had already wanted. But anyway, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
I guess like how can I guess I don't I guess I'm not totally sure how to phrase the question, but I guess I'm just looking for like what suggestions would you give to a player when it comes to deck selection? Like what's your philosophy with deck selection, with predicting, what you're comfortable losing to or beating in a given format, and how that impacts what you're going to play to a tournament?
Yeah. So, okay. This is one that I'm still struggling with myself. And part of that goes back to and scrubbing out of NAIC, losing to Arc or not Arc King Lu and Arceus Gudra. And these decks are like, well, I accepted the loss to them and then I lost and now I feel bad because I lost, right? But it's like, okay, you have to look at what are the most popular decks and what's the percentage of those popular decks. If Guardy is the most popular deck, that doesn't mean you can't take an auto loss to Guardy because we're used to the Lugia Silver Tempest format. Terrible, terrible format. Very fun game sometimes, but terrible format. You can't lose Lugia. Lugia is literally a third of the tournament.
Yeah.
But normally, that's not true. Normally, a deck is 10, 15, maybe 20% of a tournament. You're going to play maybe two of them. You can take an auto loss of the most popular deck and be fine. So you have to kind of weigh the like, okay, what are all of my matchups?
Yeah.
What
Alex
deck?
Szymanski seems to be like the master of this now.
Yes. Gosh, like between his what UIC winning list that was like very clearly had weaknesses, but those weaknesses didn't matter, did they? Or let's go United Wings. United Wings at NAIC took some auto losses. It eventually mattered because
Yeah.
the great start turned into a top 64, which is a good finish. But when you look at an IC champion who started what 8-1, top 64 is not the best in the world. But yeah, being able to look at decks and be like, well, I can lose to these things and it's fine because my other matchups are so good, or they're not going to be played that much and it's fine. So it's like, I highly recommend everyone predict the meta for every single regional, even if you're not going, write it down. And then when they do the thing on screen, we're like, this is the day one meta, this is the day two meta, compare your results. That's something that I kind of figured out that I'm good at this purely by doing that. And so that's the first step. Don't just watch my videos and be like, this dude's good at it. Do it yourself and then see how good you are at it. And then from there, picking a deck is like, okay, if this is the meta I'm expecting and I now feel confident in this, what are the matchups? Can I add a tech to make this better? Or can I auto lose to, 10% of the decks? Yes, you can. Because then you're going to go 8-1, and 8-1 is a really good record.
Yeah, and there's also like you said with like the Tinglu and Gudra, like sometimes you just have to accept that I I hit these decks that I typically don't hit, but like that doesn't mean your prediction is wrong, right? Like then you look at the meta
Yeah.
chart for day one and it's like, oh, I was right. It's not my fault that I didn't hit any Guardy, right? Like things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, sometimes you have to accept like there are decks that you're not expecting and you will hit them because yeah, 20% of the meta is Guardy, but that doesn't mean 20% of your games are against Guardy. You're more likely to play against Guardy than you are against Ting Lu, but when they randomize it, you're playing against one deck and that deck happens to be Ting Lu.
Yeah. It's more about maximizing like predicting the meta to maximize your odds of hitting good matchups. There's
Mhm.
no way to actually just guarantee you're going to hit that percentage of decks.
Correct. And one of the best people at this would be like Sander, right? Sander with his control decks are very specific. They are catered to beat the exact decks playing these exact cards. And so that's another thing that if you want to get good and you're not in a huge hurry, these types of counter decks, being able to theory them out and then look at if it would have worked in a tournament is usually a good idea. It doesn't work for locals. Don't be like, oh, I brought control to a league cup and won. Locals metas are kind of so small that they're random usually, or they're a little too random to do that. But like if you kind of theory this out or you look at control decks, you're like, how can I edit a control deck to fit at the meta? And then you look at the results after, and that's another really good way to go about it. And if you do bring one to a regional, you might just get absolutely stomped because you weren't expecting to do things
Hmm.
or hit certain things. But yeah, I think Sander is the best at that of like not just predicting the decks, but predicting the cards in the deck.
Mhm. So, um, I think we're gonna begin to start wrapping up, but there is kind of one more big
Mhm.
topic I do want to discuss, which is so we're talking about the upcoming format, the how can a player improve in general. We have Obsidian Flames coming out. We already have most. There hasn't been a Wisconsin regional listed or anything for like June yet, so I feel like there's going to be a couple more events announced. Or if not, then it just sucks because there's no Wisconsin region for me to go to. But
Yeah.
we have a general idea of what this this oh god the word season the season is gonna look like. Just like forgot what that word was. What is your kind of testing been looking like? Have you been doing any testing for kind of the upcoming format? I know we still have about a month left of Paldea Evolved. Obsidian Flames has some interesting cards, some archetypes, but a lot of people are predicting it to not massively change the meta. What have you been kind of looking at for this upcoming format or for the remainder of this format and your plans for how to play out the early part of the season?
Yeah, so currently I'm playing around with Guardy and Mew purely because they are decks that require a lot of actions and a lot of thought. And I think that's the best way to get better at the game is to play difficult decks. And I don't want the level of thinking that Lost Zone requires. Like Lost Zone Tina is just a little too much for me to want to play while like I'm on a treadmill or something like that. But Guardy and Mew have been what I've been on so far. I think that they will both survive pretty darn well. We'll see if Charizard kills Mew. That'd be fun. But otherwise, yeah, I think most of the current stuff is going to survive pretty darn well. But the like, okay, that's a boring answer. What's the fun answer? I have been theorying a lot of Glimora with one of my friends, Anya.
Dude, I just saw Glamora deck yesterday and I was thinking about it. I was like, this is insane.
Yeah, so we've got 3 ideas that I'll happily leak right now because Sacramento is going to be my first regional, and that's going to have 151 legal, which opens up. And Mew V is such a good card. Or not V, what? EX? Mew EX is
EX,
such a
yeah.
disgustingly good card.
Yes.
Like
And
every
it's
time I
is it
look
all
at it, it's like, why
colorless?
3 colorless
So
energies?
even Charizard can play that thing. Anything can play
Yep.
that thing.
Yeah, the Mew EX is just such a good. It's going to change things probably. I don't see a world where it doesn't. Anyway,
Yeah.
Glamora. So there's a couple Glamora ideas that I've had because the ability is incredibly good. Like I think everyone reads it and knows that, but it's like, well, the attack is kind of mid, and you're not wrong. 2 fightings for 150 and poison isn't like super great, but it's got some cool stuff, right? So you can play it with Path of the Peak plus Lunatone Soul Rock. Lunatone Soul Rock say your Pokemon are not affected by Stadium's effects. So Path doesn't shut down your Glamora, but it still paths your opponent with the Lunatone Soul Rock on the
And for
bench.
anyone who doesn't
So,
know, Glamora, when it's active, your
oh,
opponent's bench shrinks to 3, which for a lot of decks is just devastating.
yeah, the only deck that's not devastating is Arceus. And the cool thing is, you Oko Arceus because 150 becomes 300.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the like, ooh, this is kind of fun, right? So that's one of the ideas. The other one is with Rapid Strike Urshifu. You already play Fighting Energy. You can run Raihan, stuff like that. But your opponent has to now bench Manaphy on their 3-card bench. Or you have Rapid Flow in order to just decimate their bench. And so that's another like some sort of bench attack with Glamora could be good. Because normally Manaphy is like, yeah, it's my 5th bench spot. Who cares? I never use that spot anyway. And I was like, well, you got 3 and you have to bench a Manaphy. So that's another like, okay, how can you bench snipe with this thing? So there's the Path version, which is probably the best because it's the simplest. There's an Urshifu version, or to go off of the bench sniping idea in Lost Box, because you can use Greninja so effectively, you're able
Oh,
to be like, okay,
interesting.
I can promote it, switch your switch carts to switches. So you can promote it, constantly pressure their bench while also, pressuring with Moonlight Shuriken and Sableye Lost Mine and stuff like that. And could potentially be a Kyogre build or not too. That'd be another option, right? Because then, well, you can't have your Manaphy out there, and I have all this bench damage that I can do. So there's multiple ideas with Glamora. They could all be so bad,
Yeah,
but
the
it's
Lost Box
interesting.
one is interesting. I do like that the Glimmet has Ascension. So like
Me
if you're
too.
playing against Guardy, what they play their two battle passes, they bench 3 or 4 Raltses, they got their Greninja, and then you just like attach a fighting energy and evolve, and they just lose half their Pokemon. Like that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Ascension that has to be the optimal one. Like it's got 40 HP, but I don't think I care because
Yeah.
like every other deck in the world is you just can't have that much on your bench, right? You can have a couple Comfeys down and stuff like that if you're Lost Box. So it's like, well, if I get them evolved before you get to your Sableye turn, which is going to be harder because now you have Greninja and 2 Comfeys and one more spot left. Like that's not that much to work with in order to get stuff in the Lost Zone. So yeah, I I think the ability is too good. Parallel City, I didn't play when it was standard, but I played in expanded with it, and it's so powerful that I think that ability is too good not to mess around with. That's where my heart is right now. Charizard's going to be good. That's not fun. Charizard just attacks stuff. I want something else.
Yeah. I am curious to see how Charizard does because like I feel like every time a set comes out, we get some like lists from Japan that are just like, how is this winning? You see that it won like a 14-person locals, and you're just like,
Mhm.
what exactly is going on here? I saw like a Charizard Lost Box deck. It's just Lost Box with like a 3-1-3 Charizard list and rare candies. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this doesn't work. Like there's no way. There's literally no way. Um but I am curious to see how Charizard does. I don't know if it's obviously good just in terms of like
Yeah.
raw power, but it's like a lot of abilities, a lot of rare candies, just a lot of moving parts. Obviously like Chen Pao is a similar situation. And it's pretty good, but it just has a lot of moving parts and some potential to just like not function right. I'm curious if Charizard's going to end up in the same situation.
I think I like about Charizard the most, so versus like a Xian Pao, for example, is it accelerates to anything and accelerates from the deck. And Qian Pao obviously requires multiple pieces, as in you need your Qian Pao, you need the active to use the ability, and you need the required amount of energies. Charizard gets them out of the deck, so you don't need them in hand. It can go to anything, so you can play it with anything. And so I think Charizard will definitely be good. Now it is missing refinement, right? Guardy's so good because its stage one is broken. Charizard's pure rare candy, but I think Charizard for sure is going to be good just because accelerating from the deck is always good. And that's your draw engine. You don't need a draw engine. You're like, Iono to 6. I got my rare candy Zard. Now I've got an attacker set up and I'm good to go. What more do I need? I don't need anything. I have a 330 HP beat stick
Yes.
smacking you in the face.
Yeah. I guess one thing that I've also kind of have seen though is like Charizard's base damage itself is fairly low. Like I mean, it's basically just like a
Mhm.
busted like Galarian Moltres. So,
Yeah.
and I mean, there's some like insane attackers you can just use that ability on. Like one of my favorite is just like Delphox V. Like, oh, Lost Box
Yeah.
didn't bench Manaphy. Like, time to just wipe their board, right? But I do wonder like if it gets to a point where your Charizard's damage output early is too low, so you're putting all your energies onto other stuff. Well, once that stuff gets knocked out and you get Iona to like 2, 3, are you going to be able to get another rare candy Charizard for your Charizard to actually start attacking? You know, um, I mean, I'm like overly theorizing this, and I hope that those Charizards going to be affordable to actually test out the deck early enough for Pittsburgh. We'll see how that goes. But we're just kind of like spitballing here. I've seen people with like Pidgeot, which is like, oh god,
Yeah.
more rare candies, more
No,
stage
I think
twos.
I'm a big fan. I've seen Arceus with Charizard and Pidgeot. I'm such a fan of that. Like, because Starbirth gets everything you need, but also your early game attacker is Arceus. It's your consistency early game, and then your late game attacker is Charizard with your late game. I'm into that. That is my current favorite idea: is Charizard, Arceus, Pidgeot.
I do like it. Pigeon has been surprisingly polarizing. I think it like got like revealed at like 4 a.m. Everyone was like going crazy
Mhm.
for a day, and then the next day everyone's like, "This card's unplayable." It's like it's got to be somewhere in the middle. There's no way it's unplayable. The ability is just too good.
This happens all the time with Pokemon players, and this set is the best example of it. We compare a card that's been like essentially a reprint to the old version, and we're like, well, it's not the same, so it's worse. Like, Pidgeot is now worse because blah. Or like, oh, the game's slightly faster. It's, it's worse for whatever reason. Or Cleffa. Oh, Cleffa, and I do wish Cleffa were a little better, honestly, but Cleffa doesn't have, baby doll eyes or sweet sleeping face or, whatever the things were. So it's clearly worse. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean it's bad. And so we want to say worse means bad. And that's just not true. But of course, Twitter interactions don't work that way, right? You have to either be best or worst. And then you get the
Yes.
likes. And then that's what's pushed you in the algorithm.
Yeah, there's no like, you've mentioned this before, but like Pokemon kind of has like, if you're into this kind of content, you're using this kind of social media. Back in the day, it was Facebook, which like maybe it's great we're not using Facebook as much anymore, but now we're all on Twitter. So what is the right place for this discussion? Probably none of them. Probably just your testing group, right?
Yes.
Yes, that's I think that's the optimal setting for discussing how good these cards are.
Shout out to so at Tabletop Village, we are very much like, okay, getting parents involved in the community and stuff like that. Owen, who's a friend of mine but also one of the employees there, helped a parent get on Pokemon Twitter, like, these are people to follow, blah blah blah. And they immediately went back to Owen. It's like, why is everyone in the Pokemon community on Twitter so clout chasey? And it was like, I mean, yeah, though, because
Yeah,
it's what works. Yeah, that sounds right.
yeah, you
But to
gotta
go back
get
to
that
this is
engagement.
the best or worst. Yeah.
Now, to start getting us wrapped up, I do want to just kind
Mhm.
of ask you one final question, which is then, whether it comes to this upcoming season, whether it comes to your podcast, streaming, YouTube, any of the content you make, what is kind of the goals? We were talking about, like, your first
Mhm.
season, your goal was to get to Worlds. What are your goals, in a broad sense, whether it's playing or content or whatever, for this upcoming season?
Yeah. So on twitter.com/mellow_Magikarp, I have a pinned thread that everyone should go follow me and like that one. Three goals are on it. And those three goals are earn a Worlds invite, which even after 600 CP, it's less realistic, but it's still number one. And it's very simply, Worlds is the most fun thing. Like, the Worlds experience, if you ever gone as a spectator, it is next level. It makes NAIC look like a league challenge. There's everything about it is so fun. So it is still my number one. My number two is to top cut a regional. I have lost two win-ins to top cuts of regionals, one at Portland 2019. I lost to Danny Altavia by getting not turn one, but like, I never evolved. He was playing Pidgeotto control. He got the hand lock off by like turn
Uh,
two. I never got a Zoroark out. I dead drew so hard. He decked himself out and got the chip loop. I was like, I hate this. So I scooped up game three. We didn't officially have a gentleman's agreement, but it was like, I can't win game three. Like, you
yeah.
hand locked me on turn three.
That
Like, I'm
deck was
screwed.
insane. That deck was so good.
It was so good. I beat Riley, who was playing the same 60 in Swiss the day before. And I was like, this matchup's so free. And then I played Danny and it was like, oh, this is this is next level. Like, he's such a good player. But anyway, I lost that one. And then I lost to Drew Kennett at Salt Lake City 2022, who ended up winning. Congrats to Drew. But I threw that was another one. Dude, bro, I use the ability use markers. So I
Mm.
remember to use my abilities. I forgot to use quick shooting.
Oh,
And then I lost because I was 60 damage short, which was the 3 turns of quick shoot.
three! You missed it for 3 turns.
I never used quick shooting once the whole game. I evolved into it and just
Oh
sat
my
there.
god,
So bad. So that was a massive, massive, massive throw.
that's
So I
tough.
need to top cut a tournament. I am both times have been just the worst losses, right? So that's my number two, top cut a regional. I'm only going to go to 4 regionals plus an IC this year unless they add something else. So that is, and for anyone who wants to see me, Vancouver, Portland, Sacramento, LA are the 4 I'm going to go to. And then my number 3, the hardest one, is I need to play at least 5 games of Pokemon per week, which some people is like, bro, I do that at work during meetings. Congrats. I can't do it at work.
Hmm.
It's hard, dad. And then Pokemon's a number 2 hobby behind lifting. Lifting will always, always, always take precedent over Pokemon. Like, going to the gym is very important for my mental health, right? But playing Pokemon is the only way I'm going to get a Worlds invite or top cut a regional. So I have to do that. Those are my 3 there. And then in terms of goals for content, I actually don't have any. That's why I'm such a mediocre content creator. I just kind of do what I want to and see what happens. Like, I don't look at results. I don't look at things. I don't look at trends. I don't worry about the algorithm. I'm just kind of like, yeah, let's see what happens.
Mhm. Fair enough.
Yeah, I wish I had a more fun answer to that one,
Oh,
but it's like,
dude,
yeah, I don't
you're
know. Keep
totally
doing the
fine.
podcast, do YouTube videos sometimes.
Yeah, just keep enjoying yourself, do it at a good pace, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I feel that. I just like recorded 3 interviews and then left for a month. Like, whatever. I'm back now. We're chilling. Hopefully, school
Exactly.
doesn't mess with me in this, in the same way. We'll see how it goes.
It'll go fine. I love this podcast.
Oh, I appreciate it. I will say I didn't know when to bring it up, but your podcast was one of like the big main inspirations for me getting this started. I think it was like your interview with Xander Bennett talking about like the history
Ooh,
of Pokemon content, which
yeah.
is such, I mean, I don't know like where it lands on like the your most viewed videos, but it's like it's such a niche topic, but I listened to it, I was like, this is awesome. This is like by far the most interesting thing I've ever heard. And I was like, I want more of this. And I guess I'll try making it myself, and
That's been my
here we are.
favorite. Like you said, I don't know where it lands on your stuff. It's pretty low in terms of the like time frame that it was in, but those episodes always are, but they're my favorite. Like we did one interviewing TC Evolutions, how they started their company, what sponsorships actually look like. I'm still not sure that sponsorships in the TCG and these teams aren't money laundering fronts, but that's not the point of this. Like it makes no sense to me. That was a very fun one. I interviewed the owner of Tabletop Village about what it's like to own a card store.
That one was
And
really good too. Yeah.
oh God, I recommend everyone listen to that. He was incredibly honest. Like the margins are so low. It is not a place to get rich. It is so much work. And they're very successful. Like they are technically one of the more successful. They're not, they're incredibly fine as a business, but it is so good. But yeah, those types of things where it's like, yes, I could talk about the meta every week or whatever that every other podcast does, but that's not fun. Or like talking to Ross Cawthon, my absolute favorite episode. Talking to Ross about like how he came up with the truth and his history in the game and chalk lock was so much fun and the type of thing that like you just don't get anywhere else. And I'm glad you're doing this podcast because this is what I want. I want people to take what I'm doing, like I said earlier, and do it themselves because I do the things I want to listen to, but I don't want to listen to myself doing them. I want to listen to other people doing them.
Yeah. Well, now you can listen to yourself, but interviewed by someone else.
Exactly.
Um, I think on that note, we're gonna start wrapping up. I did
Mhm.
already. I normally ask what events you're gonna be at, but you already mentioned kind of like all the
Yep.
the four West Coast regionals. Is there anybody you want to shout out, and where can people find you if they want to see how you're doing?
Yeah, shout out to the best local game store in the country, Tabletop Village, located in Seattle, Washington. Be sure to check out tabletopvillage.com as well because we're adding a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to have some of our locals who are incredibly good. I insulted my locals from years ago. My current locals have one player in top 16, two other players who are chasing top 16 last season, and we had two players who are in top cut of NAIC from Washington State who go to Tabletop Village.
Oh
So
boy.
absolutely cracked locals now, which is unfortunate for me getting an invite, but check out, there's going to be articles and stuff like that on there. Or if you're a Poke parent, there's going to be a lot of resources for Poke parents, or if you know any about how to get their kids into competitive Pokemon, because currently one of the biggest things for juniors and seniors to actually play the game is their parents don't know what they're doing, which is fine. I totally get it. When my kid wants to play Magic, I'm going to have to learn so much or whatever they want to do, right? But yeah, there's a ton of resources, tabletopvillage.com. If you're ever in Seattle, be sure to visit. The owner is incredibly nice and he will point you to the best place. Like you can come with no itinerary to Seattle, go to tabletop, ask him what to do, and you'll get the best suggestions in the world. I promise.
Hmm.
Shout out to Doomed Gaming. Senior Doom makes a bunch of playmat stuff like that. You can use the code DULCETFISH, DULCETFISH, for 10% off your order there. Shout out to the whole Carpe Diem Rats team as well. You all are amazing. And you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at mellow_magikarp.
Fantastic. Mello/Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. I love talking about myself, and I don't get to do that on my podcast, so I'm glad I got to do it here.
Yes, it would be a little too egotistical there, but here you have a whole hour to do it yourself.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, have a good one.
You too.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Kevin for being so generous with his time. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one, please consider giving the podcast a follow, review, or rating wherever you're listening. Or if you want to follow us on social media, you can follow the podcast on Twitter or X at memcappodcast. Or if you want to see me post about my own TCG experiences, you can follow me at RZGladys. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.